and her face showed concern. "Eudora, Lord have mercy, I finally found you," I heard. The neighbors won't stop talking. What happened to the boy, to Quincy? "This morning I saw a police car in front of your house." Seeing her kind face, full of goodness and that sincere concern in her wrinkled eyes, the wall of emotions I had tried to build came crashing down. Tears burst forth, tears of helplessness and fear. I told her everything. That Quincy had been arrested unjustly on absurd accusations. I only omitted the detail of Detective Zuri's secret investigation. Mrs. Opaline remained silent, listening attentively, while her thin hands patted my back softly to console me. When I finished speaking, she stayed thoughtful for a good while, staring into the void. Suddenly, she grabbed my hand, pulled me closer, and lowered her voice as if fearing someone might hear us. "Eudora, listen to me, I have something to tell you. Maybe it will help." About 2 weeks ago, one night when I couldn't sleep old age things, I went out to the porch to get some air. I saw Nia Imani, your daughter-in-law, standing by the gate, talking to a strange man. He was tall, and I remember very well he had a long scar on his cheek. My heart began to pound in my chest. The man with the scar from the photo. Mrs. Opaline continued, recalling. They were speaking in low voices, but since it was early morning and everything was silent, I managed to hear a few words. I saw Nia Imani hand him a thick envelope and tell him the package for Frankfurt. He nodded and replied something that I don't know why stuck with me. "The widow from Detroit is already clean?" At the time it seemed strange to me, but then I forgot it. Now that you tell me this, I remembered the widow from Detroit clean. I murmured that was a code without a doubt. The widow from Detroit was perhaps a victim, and clean must be a code to say the deception was completed. I woke up suddenly. There was a witness, someone who could confirm that Nia Imani had ties to the fugitive criminal. That was the key piece to destroy the defense that Quincy acted alone. "Mrs. Opaline," I squeezed her hand tight. My voice trembled with emotion. "Could you accompany me to the precinct? Your testimony is crucial. You can save Quincy." She didn't hesitate for a second. She looked at me firmly. "Of course, honey, for Quincy. I love him like a grandson." I ran into the house to get the car keys. Mrs. Opaline sat in the passenger seat. We left that familiar street where we had lived in peace for so many years. I drove with one hand, while with the other I tried to call Zuri to give her the good news, but she didn't answer. Maybe she was busy in the lab. I decided to go straight to the precinct. When we took the main avenue, a white truck with no logo or sign appeared suddenly from a side street. It shot out like a wild beast, its lights aimed straight at my eyes. A blinding glare left me completely in the dark. I only managed to hear the tearing scream of Mrs. Opaline next to me, and the horrific sound of metal colliding. Then everything turned to darkness. A strong smell of disinfectant invaded my nose, pungent and unpleasant. I tried to open my eyes. My head hurts as if it were being split with a hammer. The white hospital light hurts my eyes. I am lying in a bed with an IV in my arm. Zuri is standing next to me. Her face is tight as a rope. She no longer has that usual calm. Her normal clothes were replaced by her police uniform. "You're awake," she said in a grave voice. "You only suffered a mild concussion and some bruises. Will Mrs. Opaline be okay?" I asked with a dry throat, every word hurt coming out. Zuri remained silent for a second that felt like a century. She avoided looking me in the eyes. "The woman who was with you did not survive. We are very sorry. The truck fled the scene. We are looking for it." My world collapsed again. I burst into tears. Hot tears ran down my cheeks, tears of fear, of pain for losing such a good neighbor, and of unbearable rage. Between sobs, I told Zuri what Mrs. Opaline had told me about the man with the scar, about the package and the widow from Detroit. Zuri put a firm hand on my shoulder, giving me strength with that simple gesture. "Mrs. Vance, do you understand now? They don't just scam. They are willing to kill to silence those who know too much. This fight is no longer just for your son." At that moment, I knew she was right. The fear I felt turned into hate. I wasn't going to give up. I was going to fight for Quincy and for Mrs. Opaline, the brave neighbor who paid too high a price for telling the truth. The next 2 days in the hospital felt like 2 years. The physical pain from the bruises and constant dizziness didn't compare to the mental torment. Zuri came often, not only to update me on the investigation, but also to ensure my protection. There was always a plainclothes officer at the door of my room, Watching day and night, his silent presence made me feel safe, but also reminded me that danger was very close. In moments alone, guilt drowned me. If I hadn't taken Mrs. Opaline in the car, if we had been more careful, if I had called a taxi instead of driving myself. Thousands of ifs swirled in my head on one of her visits. Seeing me sitting unresponsive, Zuri put her hand on my shoulder and told me firmly, "Mrs. Vance, don't blame yourself anymore. They were already after her. Maybe they saw her talking to you. Maybe they were already watching the house. Sooner or later, they were going to act. The fault isn't yours. The fault belongs to those bastards." Mrs. Opaline's funeral was held while I was still in the hospital. Her son, a middle-aged man living in another city, called me on the phone. He didn't reproach me for anything. He only thanked me for being with his mother in her last moments. I asked Verna to order a large wreath of flowers. On the black ribbon, I wrote with my own hand, "For a brave neighbor, justice will be done." It wasn't just a promise to Mrs. Opaline, it was an oath to myself. The day I was discharged, it was Zuri herself who came to pick me up in her car. On the way home, while the car moved through streets I knew so well, she gave me the first piece of good news. "We found the truck," she said, staring at the road. The driver rented it with fake documents, but he made a stupid mistake. He paid for the rental with a credit card, even though that card was also fake. Created with stolen information, the transaction left a digital trail that my team couldn't ignore. Zuri explained that the cybercrimes investigation team she leads had followed that trail to a seedy internet cafe in a working-class area on the outskirts of Atlanta. Thanks to the security cameras there, they managed to get a clear image of the suspect at the exact moment he was making the online transaction, and that face, Zuri said with a tone of satisfaction impossible to hide, matches perfectly with a profile in the FBI database. His real name is Darius Scar Mitchell. He's a thug serving criminal organizations, with a record for assault and extortion. And do you know what else? His most distinctive feature is a long scar on his right cheek. Only a few hours after confirming his identity, the police raided a cheap motel where Darius was hiding. He offered no resistance, as if he already knew that day was coming. Zuri took me back home, made sure everything was in order, and then went back to the precinct to participate directly in the interrogation. That same night, she called me to tell me what happened. At first, he was like a stone, Zuri recounted. He repeated the same phrase over and over again. "It was a traffic accident. I got scared and ran." He insisted he didn't know who Nia Amani was and had no connection to any criminal ring. He played the role of a scared truck driver perfectly. They interrogated him for 24 hours straight. The most experienced investigators took turns, interrogating him using all kinds of tactics, from the hardest to the softest, but they couldn't get anything out of him. Finally, I decided to try something different, Zuri said in a more serious tone. I didn't enter the room as a police inspector anymore. I entered with some photos. She had printed in color the photos of the victims. She found in Nia Amani's notebook elderly, kind people, smiling with their grandchildren in the family photos. She placed them on the metal table right in front of Darius. She began to speak in a quiet voice, but with words sharp as knives. "This is Mrs. Schmidt, 82 years old, from Berlin. All her retirement money disappeared. She had to sell the house where she lived her whole life and move to a state nursing home." She pushed another photo. "This is Mr. Dubois, 78 years old, from France. He was a widower. After realizing he had given all his assets to scammers, he took his own life, widower." "Clean," I whispered on the phone. Mrs. Opaline's words, Zuri continued. She placed a portrait photo of Mrs. Opaline on top. "And this is Mrs. Opaline Chesteron, 65 years old, a kind neighbor. You killed her just for accidentally hearing a conversation she shouldn't have heard. She had 3 grandchildren waiting for her at home." Finally, Zuri looked him straight in the eyes with an icy voice. "If you cooperate and give up the mastermind, you will only face charges for vehicular manslaughter and could access a sentence reduction under the law if not. We will make sure you bear full responsibility for the death of Mrs. Opaline with a charge of premeditated murder, plus a long list of crimes for complicity and fraud. You are going to die in prison, Darius." The stone began to crack. Darius lowered his head in silence for a long time. The ticking of the clock in the interrogation room became deafening. Finally, he looked up and began to speak. He confessed he had been hired by Nia Amani. He was the man with the scar Mrs. Opaline had seen. At first, they only ordered him to scare her so she would stay quiet. maybe breaking into her house or damaging her car, but seeing that we were driving hurriedly toward the precinct, he got scared and called Nia Imani. The order was to act with more force. And then he revealed the most important information, a card up his sleeve that no one expected. Nia Imani, she is very cautious, Darius said with a hoarse voice. She has something she calls insurance. An external hard drive, everything is there, a complete list of victims. Recordings of scam calls, money transfer schemes, and most importantly, recordings of internal meetings of the whole ring, where the voices of the ringleaders are heard. She said if anything happened to her that would be published. Automatically, where is that hard drive? Zuri asked insistently. Darius shook his head. I don't know, but she never separated from it. It was her life. If you find Nia Imani, you will find that drive. Immediately, Zuri's technical team got to work. They analyzed the last calls Darius had made before being arrested. Most were irrelevant, but there were some unregistered numbers of the burner type communicating with him very often. Following the weak signal of one of those numbers, they managed to locate her last location, a secluded cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Almost an hour north of the city, a heavily armed SWAT team was sent immediately. They didn't burst in at once, but set up a silent perimeter, cutting off all escape routes. Zuri called me at dawn. Mrs. Vance, we found her. Come, you deserve to witness this. She sent a car for me. We didn't go directly to the cabin, but stopped at a mobile command center, in reality a large van equipped with screens and cutting-edge technology, parked a few blocks from the target hidden behind some trees. The atmosphere inside was tense. Technicians were glued to monitors. Only keys clicking and brief, precise conversations could be heard. Sitting there, I could hear my heart beating fast. The nightmare of so many days was about to end. Zuri handed me some headphones. We've intercepted the cell signal inside the house. Listen. With trembling hands, I put them on. After a few seconds of static, a familiar cutting voice made itself heard. It was Nia Imani. Yes, they arrested Darius, an idiot. He thought he was tough, but turned out to be soft. But it doesn't matter. A male voice responded on the other side, raspy, somewhat nervous. Nia Imani let out a sarcastic laugh that I could imagine perfectly without needing to see her. Don't worry, everything is in my husband's name, Kwesi. He's a lovesick fool. A few fake tears are enough, and he believes everything. Now he's in prison for me taking the fall for all the crimes. Let the police tear apart the entire state, they won't find me. The hard drive is still here, completely safe. It's our life. A lovesick fool, that phrase was like a stab straight to the heart. I clenched my fists tightly, my nails dug into my skin. Rage invaded me completely, consuming any trace of fear. That witch had not only destroyed my son's life, but she had trampled on his love and trust in the cruelest way. Zuri looked at me sideways. Noticing the fire in my eyes, her gaze lit up. She said nothing, only nodded silently to the SWAT team leader beside her. Through the radio, I heard the order in a cold, determined voice. All units move in on the main screen. The image from a drone hovering over the house appeared clearly. I saw shadows dressed in tactical gear moving fast like ghosts, surrounding the cabin from all angles. They are the ghosts of justice. The front door was battered down. Nia Imani's desperate screams were heard. Some noises of things breaking. It all happened in less than a minute, fast and effective. The commander reported over the radio with a voice showing no emotion. Target secured, external hard drive, and several mobile phones found. Zone secure. They brought Nia Imani out with her hands cuffed behind her back. She no longer had that expression of superiority. Her hair was messy, clothes a disaster. Passing in front of the command vehicle where we were, her gaze crossed by chance with the window. She saw me for an instant. Her eyes opened with surprise, but immediately filled with fierce hatred like a cornered snake. But she said nothing. The police put her in the car and took her away, disappearing into the darkness only a few hours later. With the irrefutable evidence of the hard drive and the recording of her confession, the release order for Kwesi was signed immediately. I went to the detention center to pick up my son, when the heavy old metal door opened with a tearing screech. Kwesi walked out. A few days in prison had destroyed him. He looked thinner, gaunt, with an unkempt beard and deep circles under his eyes. But his eyes no longer reflected hopelessness. Instead, there was a painful emptiness. He didn't say a word, just walked quickly toward me and hugged me tightly. I felt his shoulders shake. I hugged him hard, stroking his back like when he was a child. On the way back, he finally spoke. Voice hoarse from not speaking for days. I can't believe it, Mama. The person I loved most, the mother of my son, could do something like this to me. How could I be so blind? When we arrived at the house, Verna had already brought Jelani. The boy was sitting on the sofa with a sad expression, but upon seeing Kwesi enter, his eyes lit up. He shouted, "Daddy!" with a clear voice, and ran like an arrow toward his father's open arms. Kwesi knelt, hugged his little one tightly, and buried his face in his soft head. Seeing that scene, I knew the worst nightmare of my life was over. But I also knew my son had changed forever. The scar on his heart would never fully heal. He looked at me, and his eyes were now full of unbreakable determination. "It's over. I'm getting a divorce," he said firmly. "I'm going to fight for full custody of Jelani. I won't let my son grow up with a mother like that." A few weeks later, on the day of the first trial, the Atlanta sky was gray. I, Quincy, and Detective Zuri were sitting in the front row, reserved for witnesses and involved persons. Quincy wore a formal suit, but his face was still gaunt. He sat upright with his gaze fixed ahead, unwavering. The courtroom was spacious, solemn, with old oak benches and the national seal hanging high behind the judge. The atmosphere was charged with tension. Journalists filled the back seats, their cameras looking like black cannons aiming straight at the dock. The transnational fraud case, with implications of murder, had shaken the country, and Nia Imani was the center of all attention. The side door opened. 2 officers escorted Nia Imani inside. She wore a loose gray prisoner uniform. She looked much thinner and paler. Her once shiny hair was now hurriedly pulled back at the nape, revealing a discolored forehead. She walked with her eyes glued to the floor, not daring to look at us even once. Darius Scar Mitchell and the other accomplices of the ring were also brought in. Sitting on the accused bench next to her, the scar on Darius's cheek looked even more intimidating under the courtroom light. I was called as the first witness. When I stood up, all eyes in the room locked on me. I took a deep breath, put my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a firm, cutting voice, began to ask me about daily life with Nia Imani, about the suspicious signs that in my naivety I overlooked. I told everything from the secret calls at night, the overly expensive luxury items, to that fatal phrase about using Quincy's account so the money would look cleaner. When I recounted in detail how, together with Detective Zuri, we discovered the small black velvet bag in the secret drawer and the notebooks with the names of the elderly victims, the room fell completely silent. I could feel the indignation spreading in the air. Nia Imani's defense attorney, a sly type, tried to insinuate that I was prejudiced against my daughter-in-law to diminish the value of my testimony. "Mrs. Vance," he asked in a suggestive tone, "isn't it true that you never really accepted your daughter-in-law, a young, successful, independent woman, and that this testimony is nothing more than an exaggerated interpretation of a mother who wants to protect her son at all costs?" I looked him straight in the eye. My voice no longer trembled. It was firm and sure. I loved Nia Imani like a daughter. I felt proud of her. But my imagination couldn't have invented dozens of SIM cards from all over Europe, nor could it have invented a list of elderly people who were scammed until they had nothing left. And certainly my imagination couldn't have fabricated the photos where she appears next to internationally wanted criminals. Murmurs were heard in the room. The lawyer was left speechless and asked no more. In the following days, the evidence from the hard drive was presented. They were devastating blows impossible to deny. The recordings were played before the court. Nia Imani's arrogant voice resonated throughout the room, betraying her and her accomplices. Everyone held their breath, hearing the coldly discussed plans to scam, the repugnant laughter while bragging about the money they had stolen. Then it was Nia Imani's turn. She stood up with her fragile figure. Everyone thought she would deny everything, blame circumstances, but no. Instead, she decided to confess everything. Her voice was monotone, without emotion, as if reading a report on someone else's life. She told that 2 years ago, after failing in a cryptocurrency investment, she had been left with a huge debt to loan sharks. They threatened to harm not only her, but also Kwazia and Jelani. It was then, she said, looking at a lost point, that a partner approached me. They promised to pay the debt and give me a comfortable life on the condition that I participate in their project at first. She thought she would only help with a few minor transactions. Then she recounted in more detail how they operated, hunting lonely elderly people on social media and forums. We created fake sweepstakes websites, fictitious customer service centers when victims called. We asked for the bank OTP code to confirm the prize. As soon as we got it, the technical team emptied their accounts in seconds. When the prosecutor asked the final question, "Why did you choose your own husband, Questy Vance, as a scapegoat?" For the first time, Nia Imani turned her head and looked toward us. Her gaze was empty without a shred of regret. "Because I needed a perfect replacement," she said with an icy voice. "Someone with a clean record, no criminal background. Someone living abroad to make tracking difficult, and most importantly, someone who fully trusted me, willing to sign anything I gave him." Quincy had all that. Quincy, sitting next to me, clenched his fist so hard his knuckles turned white. I placed my hand gently over his in a gesture of comfort. After several days of trial, the court finally issued its verdict. The judge faced serious, read the sentence with a voice that echoed in the solemn room. Nia Imani Vance was sentenced to 25 years in prison for multiple charges: leading a structured fraud organization, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and complicity in the involuntary manslaughter of Mrs. Opaline Chesterton. Darius Mitchell, for having collaborated with authorities, received a sentence of 10 years. The other accomplices of the ring received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years, just as though late had been served. When the police took Nia Imani away, she passed in front of our rows. Questy stood up, their gazes crossed for an instant in her eyes. There was a terrifying emptiness. In my sons, there was no longer love or pain. Only a cold and firm look, the door to the past closed forever. We left the court. The sun, after many cloudy days, appeared suddenly, forcing me to squint. The storm had truly passed. A few months after the trial, we sold the house in Atlanta. We couldn't live there anymore. Every corner, every object was impregnated with memories, both of a false happiness and a real pain. Nia Imani's office was like a scar in the house, and the living room reminded me of the day they arrested Quincy. That house had died for us. We moved to a small coastal town in the Carolinas, a place where the pure air smells of salt, and the constant sound of waves can soothe any wound of the soul. We bought a little white house with sky blue window frames, and most importantly, a small garden full of hydrangeas and lavender. Questy processed the divorce quickly. Nia Imani from prison did not appeal or ask for custody of the child. She had cut all ties with the world she left behind, sinking into the darkness she herself had created. My son obtained full custody of Jelani. With the money from the sale of the house and part of my life savings, I decided to fulfill a dream I had been keeping for years. Opening a small bakery, I called it Serenity Sweets. Because after all the storms, serenity was the only thing we craved. Every morning I wake up when it is still dark, while the whole town is still asleep. The smell of flour butter, cinnamon, and melted chocolate fills my small kitchen, measuring, kneading, shaping, and waiting for the breads and pastries has become therapy for my soul. I find calm in every repetitive movement. I find joy in creating sweets that give happiness to others. Serenity Sweets soon became the favorite spot for locals, from fishermen stopping by for a hot glazed twist before going out to sea, to kids running in after school for a chocolate chip cookie. Quincy also started a new life. He didn't return to London. The wounds of the heart made him want to be close to his family more than ever. He got a job at a small interior design workshop in town. He didn't earn as much money as before, but that job gave my son something more valuable: time. Every afternoon at 4:30 sharp, he left the workshop to pick up Jelani from school. Often I saw them walking together on the beach, holding hands, building huge sandcastles, and then watching how the waves washed them away. At night after dinner, he taught Jelani with patience, reading him stories of brave knights and kind princesses. He was fulfilling the role of father and mother in an admirable way, with all his love and tenderness. Sometimes in quiet moments, Jelani still asked for his mom. The innocent questions of a child broke my heart. "Grandma, where is my mommy? Why doesn't she come back to Daddy and me?" Quincy never lied to his son. He hugged him tight and answered with a warm, soft voice, "Mommy made a mistake, son, and now she is in a place very far away trying to fix it. But never forget she loves you very much." One Sunday, while I was placing some freshly baked sweet potato pies on the shelf, a family car pulled up in front of the bakery. Zuri stepped out of the vehicle. She wasn't wearing a police uniform anymore, just a simple floral dress. She looked relaxed and happy. Captain Banks, I smiled with joy and ran to hug her. After solving such an important case, she had been promoted. She brought a beautiful model of a pirate ship as a gift for Jelani. We sat in the small garden behind the bakery, under a pergola covered in flowering vines, drinking coffee and eating pastries fresh from the oven. The press had called her a heroine, but when I mentioned it, Zuri just shook her head. "The true heroine is you, Miss Eudora," she told me with a sincere look. "If it weren't for your unshakable faith in your son, if it weren't for your bravery in facing danger, maybe Kwesi would still be in prison and Nia Imani would still be loose out there, hurting more people when Zuri was getting ready to leave." Kwesi and Jelani returned from the beach. Both had grains of sand in their hair and sun-kissed skin. Jelani ran to show Zuri a shiny, beautiful shell he had just found. Seeing that scene, seeing the smile on my son's face, a smile that was no longer forced, I felt a warmth and deep gratitude fill my soul. That night, after closing the bakery, I stayed in the family kitchen cleaning the last baking utensils. Through the window, I looked toward the garden. Kwesi was pushing Jelani on the swing. The child's clear laughter mixed with the soft murmur of the sea in the distance, and the lingering aroma of baked goods. I once believed that living with righteousness, loving and trusting was enough to protect those one loves. But tragedy taught me a bitter lesson. Sometimes blind trust is the trap that can ruin our future. I chose to stay silent before my suspicions. I preferred to keep the peace rather than seek the truth. And the price was that my son almost lost his life for placing his faith in the wrong person. Now I understand that justice doesn't always arrive alone, and truth doesn't appear by itself. We must go out and find it with courage without giving up, even if that means venturing into the darkness and facing the most ruthless. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.